Iceland has been a place I've wanted to visit for most of my life. I don't have a good reason for that. It's just a place that I've been intrigued with, a sparsely populated island, both created and torn apart by the movement of the continental plates. An opportunity arose to go to Iceland with a running group called Marathon Expeditions, run by Jenny Hadfield and John Bingham. We took it. We started our trip from our home in Santa Maria, California. We endured the 3-hour drive to Los Angeles International Airport. Our flight was broken into 2 legs. The first leg took us to our Canadian friends in Toronto. After a 4-hour layover, we embarked on the last leg to Iceland. After a 1-hour drive, we finished our travel in the city of Reykjavik, more specifically, an apartment on the marina. Today I am doing my very first run in a foreign country. We arrived in Reykjavik, Iceland yesterday. And besides the time difference, which did not make me feel too great, I woke up really early this morning and I feel really ready to run and explore the city a little bit. So we're going to do an 8K run through the city, and I'm going to show you some sights. Not be surprised to hear that we started our trip with the running group by boarding a bus and going for a run. The Kings Road 5 and 10 miler. They even had to hire 4-wheel drive buses to get us to the start line. I lined up for the 10 miler while Jill lined up for the 5 miler, someplace in the middle of nowhere. When we finished the run, we got to soak in the Fontana geothermal pools. The geothermal pools are a part of Icelandic culture. They are so relaxing, it's hard not to fall asleep after a 10-mile run. After that, we set off for Thingvellir National Park, where 2 tectonic plates, the North American plate and the Eurasian plate, are splitting Iceland in half at about 2.5 centimeters per year. We were able to walk through the rift created by this separation from one continental plate to another. There are not many places in the world where you can do this. The next day we headed to another geothermal area to do a rather steep hike up a valley to some natural hot springs. I'm going to respect the Icelandic people by not attempting to pronounce the name of this valley. Instead, I will let the images speak for themselves. After soaking in the natural hot springs and climbing back down the valley, we headed to Skrur Geyser. Ever since 1963, this geyser has been erupting boiling hot water between 50 and 130 feet into the air every 6 to 10 minutes. On our last site for the day, we visited Gullfoss, Europe's most powerful waterfall, and a truly amazing experience. The river, fed by a glacier in the highlands of Iceland, encounters two 90-degree turns at the falls, creating a spectacular sight. The best part is that you can walk out onto a rock ledge between the falls to stand in the middle of it all. But if you're the type of person that doesn't like getting wet, this was definitely not the place for you. The next day, we started a tour of the south coast of Iceland, surrounding the area around an infamous volcano that last erupted in 2010. Some people call it
Eyjafjallajökull.
Okay, can you say that a little bit slower?
Eyjafjallajökull.
Right. Well, how do you spell it?
Eyjafjallajökull.
Well, the Icelandic language isn't easy to pick up on the fly, so let's move on. Our first stop for the day was another incredible waterfall called Gullfoss. Standing in front of this waterfall in person is incredible. It is about 50 feet wide and falls for 200 feet. We also had just enough time to climb to the top. Iceland has an interesting relationship with lupine. It isn't native to Iceland and it's an invasive species, so many Icelanders are against it for good reason. But lupine is a beautiful plant that prevents erosion of the stark volcanic landscapes, and it's everywhere. Icelanders in a battle against lupine are clearly losing that war. After an excellent lunch in the tiny town of Vik, we visited some coastal areas of the south side and their black sand beaches. It was about this time that it started raining, but that wasn't going to stop us. Our last stop for the day was yet another breathtaking waterfall. This one was not as large as the last two, but it was different because you could walk behind the cascade. Since I was already mildly hypothermic by this point in the day, I had nothing to lose by enduring more cold water. The next day, we all headed out for the Volcano Run, also known as the Game of Thrones Run. It's called the Volcano Run because we were running under the shadow of the active volcano, Mount Hekla. It's called the Game of Thrones Run because parts of the Game of Thrones TV series were filmed in this area. The Icelandic search and rescue team organized and hosted us on this incredibly windy day. The winner of the Volcano Run was the person that drew the 8s of hearts from the deck at the finish line, so I was excited when Jenny handed me the 8 of hearts. Eventually, I found out the Ace of Hearts was the winning card, not the 8s of hearts, because that makes no sense at all. After the run, we were off to one more smaller waterfall where our bus driver dove into the icy water for a swim. A true Icelander. I'm sorry I failed to film that event. Then we headed back to Reykjavik and the Foss Hotel. By now, you may have worked out that the Icelandic word for waterfall is foss or foss. After all the waterfalls we saw, this seemed an appropriate name for our hotel. The next day, we began by visiting the world-famous Blue Lagoon. The Blue Lagoon is a mix of warm, geothermal freshwater and seawater. The water is high in silica and minerals. Supposedly, this is beneficial to the skin. Personally, I don't buy the exaggeration of benefits, but this was still a really relaxing and fun part of the trip. I loved wandering the blue pools, grabbing a drink from the in-water bar, and even getting a face mask. Hey, when in Iceland. But much later that day was the main running event of the trip, the Midnight Sun Run. Since it was the evening of June 20th, leading into the longest day of the year, Reykjavik had over 21 hours of sunlight. The sun didn't set until after midnight, and it never actually got dark. I signed up for the half marathon while Jill signed up for the 10K run. We began running at 9 p.m. with over 3,000 other participants from 57 different countries. The next day, we were on our own for an excursion. We gathered at a base camp where we would begin our 2-mile hike to a dormant volcano crater. During our hike, we passed old lava tubes that formed around 6,000 years ago. Some of them have collapsed over the years, while others remain intact. After enjoying the stark volcanic landscape, we reached the base of the volcano. At this point, we geared up with helmets and harnesses so we can drop inside an empty magma chamber. One of the few places in the world where this is possible. And it was incredible. On our last day with the running group, we did a shorter tour of the south side of the island, including geothermal areas. Almost all of Iceland's power is derived from geothermal energy. Every home, hotel, and hot water faucet in Iceland is warmed by geothermal power, giving the water a slightly sulfuric smell. It can be detracting to Americans, but this is a cultural bias, as Icelanders consider the smell to be positive, relaxing, and beneficial. One interesting experience was the aggressiveness of the Arctic tern on a lighthouse on the south coast. These birds aggressively defend their nests and they will attack you by dive bombing your head, and there are hundreds of them in this area. Oh, and the lighthouse was pretty cool too. The volcanic coastline is chaotic and beautiful. Once again, we were able to walk between the borders of the Eurasian tectonic plate and the North American plate. But the next day, we were forced to depart from the running group, the friends we met, and the amazing experiences we had together. Jill and I headed back to an apartment at the marina in Reykjavik. But we still had one more fun experience before we left: the unique Icelandic horses. Icelandic horses are smaller than most horses, and they are the only breed of horse in Iceland. They are also cool-looking animals. Jill's horse was named Isabella, and mine was named Adam. I didn't have a chance to capture much video on this excursion because I was too busy trying to control an 800-pound animal, but our guides got a few good photos for us. But when the day ended, so did our amazing Iceland adventure. This trip was so much more than we expected, and we'll remember it for the rest of our lives. The nature, the culture, the history, and the friends.
Okay, I know I can go.